What do you think of when you look at an old locomotive like this? Do you think of the many stories that people could tell of actually driving this thing? For a while, I actually drove a locomotive until I crashed it, which is a story of itself we're not going to get into today. But today, we're going to be talking about, a little while ago, I was asked to teach at Calvary Chapel, Monmouth Independence, to teach through the book of Philemon. And I was asked to teach for a couple Sundays on it. And so when we start into the book of Philemon, it's a really short book, one chapter, but there's a big story behind it that we need to actually address the story behind, like the story behind this train, before we get into all of the nuts and bolts of what's going on. So for the next few episodes, first we're going to go through the story behind it, and then we're going to dig into it. So if you want to hear what's going on, follow us on Facebook or on YouTube so that you see the next episode and see what's going on. But right now we are in Philemon, and so the story of Philemon, it's an interesting book. And back before, we got to backtrack a little bit before, in the past to find out what was going on. We had Paul. He had visited this guy named Philemon, shared the gospel with him, and Philemon became saved. He became a born-again believer. Now, Paul, fast forward a little bit of time, Paul finds himself where? His usual place to hang out was either the temple or prison. And so he was in prison. He was in Rome. This was the first Roman imprisonment, where the closest thing we could call it is he was in house arrest. So he was chained to a guard all the time, 24/7, to this guard. And he's there in Rome. And now back in the town of Colossae, where Philemon lived, Philemon was a rich man. He owned some kind of business. He had slaves. And one of his slaves, this man here that we're talking about, named Onesimus. Onesimus decided, you know what? I don't like being a slave anymore. I'm going to run away. And so he steals from Philemon, his owner. He steals something, we don't know what. He steals it and he runs away. And he says, you know what? I'm going to run to Rome and no one will ever find me. Rome is a big city. No one's ever going to find me. No one's going to know I'm there. And so he runs to Rome. And somehow he bumps into, guess what? He bumps into Paul. And Paul shares the gospel with him. And Onesimus gets saved. He's a true born-again believer. He starts even serving Paul. And so remember, Paul's in house arrest, so he can't travel around. His ministry was all about meeting people and about sending letters and things like this. Paul couldn't do any of that kind of stuff. So he had to have helpers from people like Onesimus. And so Onesimus is helping. But along the way, Onesimus must have been convicted by the Holy Spirit. And he probably came to Paul, and it was something like this, where he comes to Paul and he says, you know what? I got to confess something to you. I didn't always used to be a free man. I used to be a slave. But I actually ran away. And I stole from my master. And Paul probably looked at him and said, well, where were you a slave? And Philemon said, or Onesimus, said, well, there's this town called Colossae. And Paul probably said, Colossae? I know people there. Who are you? Who was your master? And so Onesimus said, well, you know, it's this guy named Philemon. And Paul was probably like, Philemon? I know the guy. I'm a really good friend of his. You know what? I got a perfect plan for you, okay? I'm gonna write down this note, and you're gonna take it to Philemon, and it's gonna explain everything. So that is what the book of Philemon is all about. It is a note, a postcard from Paul to Philemon about Onesimus, and it's gonna explain some huge truths from the Bible. So check out, like the page, follow us, and you'll find out on the next episode some of the things that he's sharing through the book of Philemon, this little postcard. Check it out next time. Hi there. I want to interrupt this regularly scheduled program for a minute and say, hey, click over here, like our page, and give us a thumbs up. And if you really, really don't like these videos, click the thumbs down button twice. It really helps.